Good evening and welcome to another edition of Colorado Outspoken. I'm Steven Montez. On tonight's show, we're bringing you up to speed on what's been happening in the LGBT community around the world and right here in Colorado. We'll also be taking an in-depth look at an ongoing study with a promising new HIV vaccine. And we'll talk to some folks who can tell you all you need to know about STD testing. But wait, there's more. It's summer, so that means there's an annual photography exhibition and you should go see. And we'll give you a preview. And since summer is also prime movie season, we got a couple of good recommendations, one for the theater and one for home. Could we pack anything else in? Well, no, actually, since we only have an hour, but a great hour it's going to be. We'll kick it off with Daryl Johnson and his guests to tell you about the new HIV vaccine.
Good evening. We're here this evening to discuss an HIV vaccine trial. With me tonight is Tom Gibson, the co-chair of the HIV Vaccine Trials Network Community Advisory Board. The HVTN is funded by the National Institutes of Health and is a global vaccine program. We also have an HIV vaccine trial participant, Kenneth Peterson, and we have Deirdre Maloney, the Executive Director of Colorado AIDS Project, the oldest and largest nonprofit community-based AIDS service and education provider in the state. The mission of Colorado AIDS Project is to improve the lives of those affected by HIV and AIDS and to prevent the spread of HIV infection. Thank you so much for being with me tonight and welcome.
Thank you for having us.
So we're here to discuss a new HIV vaccine trial. And why don't we first discuss sort of the history of vaccine trials, and I think, Tom, you would be best able to address that.
Sure. As you know, to come up with a successful vaccine to fight any disease is difficult. And what makes it even more difficult is HIV. We're still learning about HIV and how it affects the body. So the government, after it discovered what HIV even is in the early 80s, did start the process of trying to find a vaccine to prevent HIV infection. As early as the early 90s, there have been various studies funded by the National Institutes of Health through programs called the HivNet and the AVAG, now called the HIV Vaccine Trials Network. And those studies started out, like with any study, typically is in animal models. There have been several different vaccines that have been studied over the past, well, since the early 90s. And those vaccines, really, one has progressed to phase 3 study, and that was found not to be successful. The current vaccine that we're looking at is in a phase 2 vaccine study. What that essentially means is before you even get into human studies, you start out with an animal study. We've now gone beyond that, and we've had a phase 1 study. Phase 1 studies are with very small groups of individuals, and they're just to see if a vaccine is safe. If it's proven to be safe, then we go on to a phase 2 study, which is to determine whether a vaccine is safe, but also whether it produces an immune response. We're now in that phase 2 study right now with the current vaccine study that's going on in Denver.
And this vaccine, it's sort of overseen by the National Institute of Health?
Sure.
And here how is it administered locally here in Colorado?
Sure. With the vaccine studies, we like to think of them as a partnership between the community. You can't have a successful vaccine trial without involving the community. The government, in this case the National Institutes of Health, which is funding a large portion of this study. And then the other part of the team is the vaccine manufacturer. In this case, it's Merck. Denver is not necessarily affiliated with the National Institutes of Health, but we do have in Denver the Prevention Center, which is cooperating with Merck to put on the study along with the Denver community.
And that's the Colorado Prevention Center.
Colorado Prevention Center, correct.
And Ken, how did you get involved with this HIV vaccine trial?
Well, I initially stumbled upon the STEP Study website back in early January and looked for the closest facility where they were doing the testing. And it turned out to be Chicago, which they were only accepting female participants at that time. So I kind of gave up on it, and then I ended up moving here to Denver in later January, then got back on the website and checked out where they're doing it here in Denver, and called the Colorado Prevention Center and gave them some, they actually did a brief interview with me, and then I went in the next day and got set up with an appointment, and they went from there.
So we probably should be clear that this vaccine trial study is for HIV negative individuals.
That is correct.
You do need to currently be HIV negative.
Yes.
And how constraining are they as far as your ongoing practices, your sexual practices and stuff like that? Do they have a lot of constraints and guidelines?
No, not really. They pretty much tell us to act and live our lives how we normally would, but they do advocate the use of protection and safe sex, definitely.
Are there any anticipated side effects to this vaccine that you're under the trial study for, or have they told you about any anticipated side effects?
Well, I looked through a list of the side effects, and it was like a mile long, but I think with the side effects, they have to put almost everything in there, from a minor headache, if somebody else in the earlier study got a headache or something like that. So really there wasn't much in the way of severe,
so you're not really anticipating any particular side effects to the trial participants?
No, not at all. And so far I've yet to have any.
So how long is this study expected to go on? How long are you a participant?
I believe it lasts about 4 years. Is that about the time?
4 years?
5 years.
5 years. Okay, I'm off by one.
Duration.
Yeah, so
what do they hope to, at the end of this 5-year trial study, what is it that they're, Tom, maybe you can answer this, what is it they are actually expecting to develop out of this? A vaccine to prevent HIV infection in the first place?
That's correct. What all these studies are hoping for is a successful vaccine that would prevent HIV infection. And a successful vaccine may or may not be 100% effective. In other words, someone who receives a vaccine might produce an immune response that will give them some protection, whether it's protection all the time or whether it works in some people but not others. We don't know. And as is the case with most vaccines for any disease, they're not 100% effective.
So safe sex practices are still an important part of anything to go along with this vaccine.
Definitely, and Deirdre might have some more comments on that.
We should maybe talk about how a successful trial, and if this did become successful and prevent people from being infected with HIV, how would that impact the currently infected population and things like that? And Deirdre, you would be better able to address that.
Sure. I think that, of course, if the vaccine is proven to be successful, whatever that looks like, it'd be hopeful. It would be a wonderful new tool for our toolbox. But I think the important distinction that we need to make is that there's a difference between a vaccine and a cure, as Tom talked about, that this would help to curtail new HIV infections, hopefully, but that there'd still be 1 million people, more than 1 million people in the United States living with HIV or AIDS, and 40 million and more around the world living with HIV and AIDS, that we couldn't forget. So we would still need to band together as a community and as funders and as the government to make sure that those people were continuing to get their services. At the same time, really the best thing we have now, and even if this vaccine comes out, is going to be HIV prevention. We know how to keep this from spreading. We need to work with people around their behaviors to educate them how to do that. And that wouldn't stop once we heard that a vaccine might be coming out. Even if it was going to help to stem the tide of HIV infections, we'd still be talking to them about the behaviors because they can still get STDs as well. So we'd be wanting to make sure that we were out there talking about it as much as we ever were. And while it's hopeful, we also want to make sure we weren't giving people an excuse to not think about HIV or AIDS anymore.
Yeah, and that's sort of with a lot of the therapies that have been developed in the last few years to take care of people that are already infected. That appears to be what has happened is the general public sort of has become complacent, and they feel like HIV is now a chronically manageable disease. And I think that's probably one of the biggest fears. As a 23-year HIV survivor myself, I know how important it is to be always vigilant about it. And just because your labs happen to be good this month doesn't mean that you start doing things that are unsafe. And this sense of complacency and that the invulnerability that people feel because there is a therapy out there, some medicines that do help with the already infected. That's why don't you discuss about how the trend has been sort of reversing lately in infections in general, just because of the therapies that are available?
Sure. I think one of the greatest misnomers of all time is the term drug cocktail, which came out in the mid-1990s with the dawn of the new meds. And they have been great for many people. But what they've also allowed people to do is let their guard down. And so what we've seen is an increase in the infection rate for the last few years. We're seeing 40,000 plus new infections in this country alone every year. And what we believe that's a result of is people thinking, oh, there's this cocktail out there that we can take. It's not a big deal anymore. Not something I need to be thinking about anymore. And so it's really, the meds have been great, but they have caused people to really let their guard down, like I said. The other thing to keep in mind is that there's a limited number of medications out there. They don't work for everybody. HIV is an extremely smart virus, which can adapt to medications in certain situations, and they come with very, very difficult side effects. As a matter of fact, at Colorado AIDS Project, we see people who choose not to take medical combinations because of those side effects and the way it affects their body. So absolutely, just like a vaccine, the meds have been a wonderful evolution for us, a wonderful tool in our toolbox, but we need to make sure that we're out there and being steadfast about getting prevention messages out there, as well as making sure we're going to continue to have services for people living with the disease.
Another thing that I'm sure that some of our viewers will maybe be concerned about is being a participant in this study and how that makes you perhaps vulnerable to the virus itself. Have they talked to you a little bit, Kenneth, about the safeguards of keeping you from becoming infected by the vaccine itself? I mean, what have they told you about that?
There is virtually no chance of becoming infected by the vaccine itself, because it does not contain a live HIV virus. As far as I understand, it has some of the, not DNA but proteins, is it? Included in basically a dead virus. And so there's no way that HIV can form from that or infect us at all.
Have they given you any statistics about how many participants they expect to eventually seroconvert, or any of the statistics about that? Because there will be a certain amount, in order for the trial to be successful, some people will have to seroconvert through their behavioral, through their own behavior. So have they given you any kind of an idea about what your own particular vulnerability is in that regard, or have that made you feel like it's a really safe trial to participate in? I mean, do you feel really comfortable about this?
I feel safe being in the trial, but getting infected with the virus, of course, that is a risk.
Yeah, it's a behavioral issue. So
yeah.
And if I can just comment on study safety. The FDA, Food and Drug Administration, does oversee all these trials, and there are certain measures that are in place to ensure the safety. And some things that are in place in this trial are, one, there's an informed consent process where people are informed of the benefits and risks associated with being a participant in the trial, as well as an oversight committee called an Institutional Review Board, or IRB. And most studies do have what's called a community advisory board, both at the local level and at the national level. So those are all safeguards to protect someone, and the Institutional Review Board especially is involved on a regular basis to determine whether there's any adverse events, whether they're serious or not, associated with the trial. And if there are any adverse events, like if there are a large number of breakthrough infections, the trial could potentially be shut down. So there are lots of safeguards in effect, and there's no way that there could be HIV caused by this particular vaccine. So.
If there is a successful vaccine developed, do you think that's going to impact the government's response to the currently infected population? I mean, is there a danger of that, of the people that are currently infected sort of being shoved aside and less importance?
Well, I think a successful vaccine would certainly take up the headlines in the media, and rightfully so. And to be honest, right now we're constantly working with the government to make sure that they're still focusing on HIV and AIDS domestically. I think that HIV and AIDS overseas is clearly a pandemic, and it's getting a lot of focus, and we're actually right now doing what we can to make sure people remember that we have an issue domestically. And I think we would just make a concerted effort to continue those discussions with the government and really work with them and advocate around making sure that they were continuing to take care of people living with HIV and AIDS here and continuing to help fund prevention messages. It'd be very easy, not just for the government, but really for everybody to say, there's a vaccine out now, we don't have to worry about that. Mm-hmm. And I think HIV and AIDS is really something people don't want to worry about. And I think that's why we've seen that apathy happen.
Well, it's already happened with the therapies,
right,
and people surviving for longer. It's
right,
not an immediate problem, so the response is not nearly as an immediate response.
Right, so we need to make sure that we were doubling, tripling our efforts in making sure that we were getting the messages out there about what the vaccine is and is not. And we would make sure we did that.
Also, even though Colorado Outspoken is a gay and lesbian television show, we need to sort of address how the face of AIDS itself has changed so drastically and how it is no longer a gay disease. And you can perhaps explain a little bit about the scope of how it's changed.
Certainly. The HIV/AIDS virus, the HIV virus does not discriminate, certainly. And the three populations we're seeing the sharpest increases in infection in the United States are women, teens, and communities of color. We're seeing people who are already disenfranchised in a number of ways, seeing sharp increases in HIV infection. And so what we're doing is going out there and working with these populations to make sure that they know all about HIV. When we talk about HIV in the context of the gay community, it's been something the gay community has actually focused on in a large way since the 1980s. And what we're trying to do with the gay community is make sure that they understand it's still an issue. For a lot of the emerging communities, we're having to go out there and really talk to them about it. In a lot of cases, it's the first time they're having these discussions. And so we're just working with them in every way that we can to help them reduce their behaviors. Nobody sets out to get HIV, nobody. And so it's different behaviors that lead to that for all kinds of reasons. And so we're going to make sure that we address those reasons as well as the HIV itself.
Well, the government's insistence, especially at the student level, on abstinence-only education, I think is that's a catastrophe. I mean, because it doesn't work, and people are not getting the information they need.
Well, I think the biggest issue around it right now is that HIV and AIDS is not part of the norm. It's not part of the dialogue that we're having on a day-to-day. HIV and AIDS is a healthcare disease, it's an access disease, it's a human rights issue, it's not a morality issue. And yet in our country, in a lot of ways, it's being couched as a morality issue. It's being couched as a right and wrong, a good and bad. And what that does is really create a lot of barriers for people that would normally be able to go out and get information and get tested and learn about their prevention efforts. It's keeping them away, and it's keeping them from doing that. And until we can make it a healthcare issue again and make it part of our day-to-day dialogue, the challenge is always going to be there.
Yeah, the argument has become so politicized that there's no reasonable discussion any longer.
That's right.
People with extreme unreasonable viewpoints are the ones who are the policy decision makers in our current administration. So, yeah, things really need to change a lot in that area. Is there any resistance on a national level for the development of this vaccine, or do you see with the government agencies just total cooperation and hoping?
Oh, you know, of course there's never enough funding, especially in the current administration, for vaccines or for other types of prevention. Apart from vaccine, the National Institutes of Health is also looking at microbicides to help prevent HIV infection, perinatal types of interventions, behavioral interventions. So there's a whole host, and you know, but really to get a handle on this pandemic, especially from a global perspective, the only way to do that is through a successful vaccine. And in order to have a successful vaccine, we definitely need community participation and community involvement, not only as trial participants, but also as advocates for a vaccine.
So why don't we sort of wrap it up at that point? If there is are there any viewers out there who are seeing this discussion that are interested in this vaccine and would like to learn more about it, they should either contact the Colorado Outspoken website, or there's also the website that you initially became involved through, and that's www.stepstudies.org.
Yes, that is correct.
And they can find out anything more that they need to find out about the HIV vaccine study. Thank you so much for your participation in this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And good night.
The Colorado Gay Photography Guild stages an exhibition of some of their members' work every year, and this is their 10th anniversary. These folks have some fantastic work, as you'll see right now.
The Photo Guild is a group of artists that have various photographic interests, and once a year we get together and display our work to the public. So tonight is PIX 10. It's the Gay Photographer Guild's 10th anniversary of the PIX photography shows. One of the other special things about PIX 10 this evening is that we have an original pastel by artist Mel Carter on display and for silent auction tonight.
Well, I love the fact that once a year that we hold this show. It's an opportunity for us to then display our wares. I love the group connection. I love the feedback that I get from the other artists in terms of my art and you know, what works and what doesn't work. So it's been a very wonderful venue for me to expand. I got started doing hands. My profession is nursing. I think that there's a great deal of healing power and connection in hands, and I thought it would be fun to do a series in hands. So I went and took a class and I started shooting, and I absolutely loved what happened. It's just magical.
Well, I'm the newest member, I guess. I just joined, so this is my first show with them, and I'm really very happy to be a part of it, and very honored also because we have all these people who've done so much work in the last 10 years. I guess for me, photography is it's sort of like another language. I'm a musician, and music is my first language in many respects, and I'm finding that expressing myself visually is another way, kind of like a language. So it's a way of expressing what I'm feeling, communicating feelings, communicating thoughts and aesthetics.
I do a lot of nudes, both male and female. This year I'm going to continue with my nudes, but most of the stuff that I have in this year's show are verticals and the tall and skinny look. So I'm not going in one particular direction. Membership in the Photographers Guild gives me the opportunity to work with other very good photographers. And this means that I can look at someone else's work and say, wow, that's good. What I want to do is be better. And it is a method of each of us ratcheting up our own skills so that every year we do a little bit better than say, wow, that's good. Let me try that next year.
The Gay Photographers Guild welcomes new members. For information on that, you can reach me at 303-587-5191, or you can email me at stjm@mac.com.
PIX 10 runs through August 19th, so you'll have plenty of time to get there. The exhibit is at the Square Deal Gallery, 1460 South Colorado Boulevard. For more information, just call 303-757-4647. As always, there's lots that goes on that affects the GLBT community, some of it happening just down the road in Colorado Springs. Here's Rick Miller to get us all caught up.
A 65-mile, 1,000-watt march to focus on the family's Colorado Springs headquarters was begun July 17th. The march was organized by Soulforce to protest the manipulation of research data by James Dobson, who claims that gays and lesbians do not make good parents. Soulforce Executive Director Jeff Lutz said Dobson's statements have brought rejection and ridicule on gay and lesbian parents. Misinformation has real tragic results. It makes living for families like ours much more difficult. We are rejected sometimes by loved ones, we are shunned by churches, and we are discriminated against in every state in this country. Also joining the opening rally was Dr. Judith Stacy, a professor of sociology whose research on the children of same-sex parents has been misquoted by Focus on the Family. Stacy reiterated for the assembled families and news media the basic conclusion of her research: the sexual orientation of gender combination of the parents raising children does not have much impact on children's development. The quality of the parents' relationship and the quality of their parenting does. Stacy concluded that although there can be slight variations, even advantages to the development of children of same-sex parents, these were differences and not deficiencies. A transgender child in Florida, genetically a boy, will be admitted to kindergarten this fall as a girl, the Miami Herald reported. She's believed to be the youngest trans child admitted into South Florida schools, which have been praised for their accommodations toward transgender students. Mental health professionals have diagnosed the child with gender dysphoria, a condition in which a person believes that he or she is the opposite gender. The child has been examined for 2 years, and it has been determined that she is not going through a phase. The Broward County school system has agreed to admit the child into school as a girl. Though she despises boys' clothes, she will dress in gender-neutral clothing and use a gender-neutral name. The United States Food and Drug Administration recently approved a pill called Atripla that combines 3 FDA-approved medicines that already form one of the most widely prescribed treatments for HIV and AIDS. These are Sestiva, Viread, and Emtreva. The medicine will still be expensive, more than $1,100 for a month's supply. Atripla can replace the 2 or more pills HIV-positive people now must take each day to keep the virus in check, making it simpler to stick to a treatment regimen. Out lesbian tennis player Amelie Mauresmo won the women's finals at Wimbledon. She beat Justin Henin-Harding for her 2nd Grand Slam title and the first that she can celebrate properly. "I don't want anyone," Mauresmo said, "to talk about my nerves anymore." Mauresmo gained notoriety in 1999 when she talked openly about being gay and lost to Martina Hingis in the Australian Open final. Before the 1999 final, Hingis called Mauresmo half a man. Gays wanting to celebrate World Pride Day in the Holy Land face more danger than usual as one group is offering approximately $4,500 bounty to whoever kills a gay participant in the event. According to the Israeli news website Ynet, the bounty is being offered anonymously and is being distributed in letters, posters, and appeals. World Pride Jerusalem is expected to take place August 10th, but the location may be moved for fear of escalating violence. Several news agencies throughout Israel are warning that underground groups are providing information to those who want to disrupt the festivities, whether they are held in Jerusalem as planned or moved to Tel Aviv as expected. As a viewer of Colorado Outspoken, you may be interested in a new campaign called Born Different. The campaign, based in Colorado Springs, helps separate the facts and myths of homosexuality and promotes equality for all Americans. It was created in response to Focus on the Family's belief that homosexuality is preventable and treatable, and a resource for explaining and defending homosexuality. If you are in the process of coming out or want to help someone better understand why some people are gay, please visit the Born Different website at www.borndifferent.org. Until next time, this is Rick Miller for Colorado Outspoken. Good night.
Lots of stuff happening in our community, and it's hard to keep up. That's why we have the bulletin board. That's coming up right now. Do you like sex? Of course you do, but we all know that a romp in the hay can be really hazardous to your health. That's why it's always a good idea to get tested regularly for sexually transmitted diseases. But sometimes that can be an awkward and expensive ordeal. Here's Fanos and her guest to tell you what you need to know about STD testing.
Tonight we've been looking at the future of HIV. But is HIV and AIDS the only sexually transmitted disease to be concerned with? According to the Center for Disease Control, an estimated 2.8 million people are infected with chlamydia every year in the United States. Additionally, they estimate 700,000 new cases of gonorrhea, along with over 32,000 reported cases of syphilis annually. Most astoundingly, the CDC estimates that 45 million Americans are currently infected with genital herpes. What is being done in Colorado to help fight this scourge? To explore this issue, we have with us Bob Noguera, who chairs the board of directors for the Colorado AIDS Project and has been volunteering for them since the early 90s. We also have the pleasure of talking with Eve Hoygaard, a nurse practitioner for Jefferson County Department of Health and Environment in their family planning and STD clinic. She's also helped pioneer health programs for lesbians in the Denver area. Thank you both for joining us.
Nice to be here.
Thank you.
And because we're talking about infection, I have an infection of my own, a laryngitis, so I hope you're be nice to me through our talk today. Well, I wanted to talk about some of those figures that we've just heard, and how just astounding it is that not only are STDs still a part of our world, but they're growing. What do you think is contributing to this resurgence of STDs?
Well, there's a lot of reasons, which I'm sure we each have our own ideas on, but one of the ones is just a very basic one is that there are more people in this country who are in the age groups to be sexually active.
That would do it.
That right there. You have the same percentage of, a million, or of 2 million, you've got twice as many people.
That's a very simple explanation,
that's
sure.
A pretty basic, simple one.
Sure.
That's a starter.
Bob?
In my view, I think that the availability of medication in our country, I think also can develop a little bit of a lighter attitude towards risky behavior, and that might be causing some of those increased numbers as well.
Do you think it's seen as less of a concern because it's not seen as quite the fatal disease that it was before, HIV specifically?
Well, I think in my view, HIV is often viewed by those that might not be in the know as something that's a chronic health condition that's managed and can be managed, simply with medication, and that's really just part of the story with HIV. But I do think that the drug cocktails that came out many years ago really did create this false sense of security and safety with a lot of people.
One other thing is, we look at the number of cases. There may be one person with 3 diagnosed different conditions, since most people who have one STD are more likely then to have a second STD as well, to be exposed to it. Sure. So just because there's, we just have to remember that doesn't mean that adding all of those people together to get how many people have an STD, because a lot of people have the same one, or they may have it something 2 or 3 times during the year. You may see somebody with chlamydia 2 or 3 times during the year.
And people often don't realize that once you've got an STD, you are at risk for getting other STDs as well as HIV. Which kind of brings us to the idea, and we may come back to the social factors later, but the risk factors. Often people will say, well, I'm not really at risk for chlamydia, or I'm not at risk for HIV. What would you say to those people?
Well, many people are at risk that don't realize it, because obviously the only way, abstinence is the only 100% way to not be at risk at all. People who are in a completely monogamous relationship, 2 people that are, any 2 people, if they both were tested and clean to start out with, they probably are at very low risk of getting something, because you don't get it walking down the street. But the more exposure chances you have, the higher your incidence of getting any STD.
And if daytime television has taught me anything, it's that you can't trust your partner. So even if you're in a monogamous relationship, that may not be the answer to being STD-free.
Well, and I also think that the risk factors can be altered by behaviors as opposed to sexual identity.
Very true.
So someone who might not identify as gay, but might be having sex with, a man having sex with other men, is obviously putting himself at risk, and then putting his partner at risk too.
So often seen just the labels as, if I label myself as a gay male, then I'm at risk. But if I don't keep that label, if everything is on the down low, then I don't have to be concerned. I'm not at risk.
Exactly, and you mentioned the down low, and within our country right now, African American women see the highest increase in incident of HIV positive diagnosis right now.
Right. And
really
correct
scary.
me if I'm wrong, Eve, women are at the highest risk in general for STDs. Is that not correct?
They are at high risk, I think, and many may. I think, and I can't say exclusively this, but I think it's within many areas, the men are more likely to have multiple partners than women, and just in traditional, especially in more traditional cultures, most of the women have limited partners, except the ones they're exposed to because their partner had other partners.
And if I'm not the one having promiscuous sex, and then I don't maybe know that my partner is, I may not know that I'm at risk, which lessens my ability to go get tested, or lessens.
Yeah. And and I think that's the other piece. And you used the word promiscuous, and I think so many people think that I'm only at risk if I'm promiscuous, but it only takes one time for you to be exposed to anything.
That's a hot button.
And that I think that's part of we were talking about the social factors before.
Sure.
I think that's part of some of that stigma around that is, well, I'm not promiscuous. I'm not at risk here, and I think that that also is a false thought.
Sure. You brought up the idea of the stigma of STDs. How does that play in a part of increasing these numbers or contributing to the spread of STDs, Eve?
Well, I'm not sure exactly. The issue of people having the stigma being people are ashamed because they don't want somebody to know that they have been in, have not been, especially if they've been in a very traditional relationship. It's embarrassing to think that somebody would find out that they haven't been. They've been with someone else, whether it was a one-time thing or on a more frequent basis. There's still a lot of stigma against STDs, as you said, because people want to think that nice people don't get STDs. I mean, that's what a lot of people think, and anybody who is sexually active really could have an STD. Anybody.
Sure. Bob, what would you say?
Well, and I think that it's such a behavior-based illness.
It is.
And if I get an STD, that means I had a certain kind of behavior. And I think that's what keeps people from wanting to talk about it. And I think that in our society, I think the conversations have shifted, especially among HIV and AIDS. If you were to rewind back to the mid to late 90s, when AIDS was the #1 killer of Americans for a couple of years there in the mid 90s, it was part of our conversation. It was part of everyday life, and I don't think that it is now, because we aren't seeing as many deaths anymore. And so folks might be thinking, well, maybe it's not as dangerous as it used to be. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to participate in risky behavior, and I'm not going to worry about reducing my harm, because I just don't hear about HIV anymore.
Sure. And you said it was behaviorally based, and often it seems like people are blamed for their STDs because it is preventable. I have laryngitis probably because I talk too much. That's behaviorally based. But is it my fault that I've got laryngitis? Is it the same thing? What would you think?
No, I'm not big on laying blame on people and putting things at people's fault. As somebody's fault, it's more of accepting responsibility for what your actions are.
Sure.
And if you accept the responsibilities for them, that includes going in and getting tested, as well as practicing safer sex at the time. And also, if you do contract something, being sure that you are willing to inform anyone who could possibly have contracted it from you or that you've been with, so that they can also be tested, as well as any other partners they may have.
I really like what Eve said about laying blame or not laying blame on people, because it really is about the frequency of that behavior. That it often is that one time that you don't wear a seatbelt that something happens in your car, or that one time that you cross against the light, you get hit by a car. But I think with sexual behavior, it could be the same thing too. If you're participating in it frequently and putting yourself at risk frequently, obviously the chances are going to go up for you.
So it's not your fault for driving a car, but wearing a seatbelt might help in a disaster.
There you go.
It's a responsibility thing.
Right, right. Well, why would somebody go get tested? What would be the reasons? Why would I go get tested?
One reason that a lot of people go get tested is there's two things that I see a lot. Is either they're concerned they have symptoms, or they're concerned that their partner has been with someone else, or their partners told them they were, or whatever. And the other is people who who are just entering a new relationship. Both parties would choose to be tested so that they would know that starting out, if somebody later turned up with something and they can't say, well, you must have had this and you didn't tell me. And again, laying blame, it's more of taking responsibility for being sure that you don't have anything that can be tested for.
Start that new relationship well.
Yeah.
Well, I think another time people might just realize that, you know, okay, I had a lapse in judgment last weekend or on vacation or whatever, and that might prompt them to go and get tested. I also hear people that at a milestone birthday, okay, I'm turning 30 or I'm turning 40 and I've never been tested, and I want to give this as a gift to myself so I can honor my own health. So.
Happy anniversary.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I like it. I like it a lot.
That's good.
So should somebody wait till they see symptoms before getting tested for an STD?
If you have reason to be concerned, I think you need to get tested right away, whether you have symptoms or not.
So what would be my reasons to be concerned?
Well, that you knew that you had been with another person, that you wanted to be sure that you hadn't contracted something, even if you didn't think they had anything, that if you had unprotected, unsafe sex with them, you might want to be sure that you didn't further expose your partners, your regular partner or partners, and you just sort of want to just find out if you're worried about it. And the other thing is, a lot of people, every year women, when they have their annual exams, will ask to have gonorrhea and chlamydia testing done because, basically they say, I don't think I have anything to worry about, but I'd rather not have to worry about it.
Sure.
And with HIV, the CDC right now says there's over 1 million people living in the United States that are HIV positive, and 1/4 of them don't know.
Wow.
And so you've got 250,000 people, upwards of, going around the country, perhaps participating in unsafe behavior, and quite possibly infecting more and more people. And so it's really, it's back to that responsibility, that personal responsibility piece we talked about before.
So let's say I've decided I'm going to get tested. Kind of walk me through, you work at Jefferson County. What would it be like to be tested there?
Well, basically, we have all appointments people need appointments when they come in. We used to have walk-in clinics, but we no longer do. We have all our appointments, and the person would call up and just say what they wanted to be tested for, whether they wanted to have, the anonymous HIV testing, in which case they don't have to give their name. They come up with a number and things like this for it. And the other person is the one who just wants to make an appointment as part of another exam, or if they have symptoms, if they say they have symptoms, that of course becomes more of an urgent thing than somebody who's just wanting routine screening, because if somebody has symptoms, we want to treat the situation. And they then are scheduled. They're scheduled with a nurse practitioner or other person that's relevant.
Would you recommend that people come in with their partners?
I think it's always nice for partners to come in and be tested at the same time, but I also feel strongly that people need to see different people and not together for this kind of testing, because you may not feel comfortable. There may be things you don't want to discuss in front of your partner, which a lot of people think that's terribly wrong, but I'm just talking reality.
Right.
And so consequently, if I have just spoken to you and you've told me something that you would rather not share with your partner, and your partner comes in, and I know this really puts them at risk. Legally, I can't tell them that they've been exposed. Wow. So it's really simpler, and you're more likely to believe that it's going to be confidential and be able to comfortably feel that way if I see you and he's the nurse practitioner who sees your partner.
Right. So there is complete confidentiality in terms of testing.
It should be. It should be.
Bob, why don't you walk us through kind of the beginnings of being tested at CAP?
Sure. At CAP, we actually have a testing clinic once a month on the last Thursday of every month. And the testing is anonymous, and it's also free. And the testing does not require an appointment. It's on a walk-in basis. And really the best thing, in addition to getting that test and getting the result, is the one-on-one counseling session that we're able to have with that person. Because that's really our chance to talk about those prevention messages, to talk about harm reduction, and really get into what are the behaviors that have brought you here today, and what are the behaviors that are going to help keep you healthy moving forward. So there will be that pre-test session, and then the test that we use is actually it's an oral test. It's called OraSure.
No needles.
And, no needles.
That's
absolutely.
Excellent. I like that.
And it actually just takes a scrape from inside of your cheek, and 2 weeks later, your result comes back, and we actually have more than 90% of the people that come in to take a test actually come back 2 weeks later for the result, which is one of the highest clinic percentages that we've been able to find, which is we're really proud of that, and really do connect a lot of that to the candor that our employees are able to have with those folks when they're coming in. Sure. But also when you do get your results, there's another opportunity there for us to talk about those behaviors that are bringing you here, and also those behaviors that either kept you HIV negative or brought you to the HIV positive place.
It seems like that would be really helpful. Is somebody going to get tested, being able to talk to somebody about, what has brought us here, and being able to be honest with knowing that there's going to be confidentiality.
And that one-on-one candor that I think two people can have, and that's really when, in my view, people learn the most, is when they're at their
the reachable, teachable moment.
There you go.
So do you think that's when prevention happens?
I think it's a lot of it is people have to think about it. They have to be made aware of it, and everybody, probably a lot of people would say, oh, well, sure, everybody knows that, but people don't think about it, and not everything is planned in advance, and things happen. Yeah. People are people.
Yeah, and I think often in that moment of passion, if you will, that all of those risk factors and awareness and education often take a back seat to a lot of other things, and that's really when the frequency of those prevention messages and the repetition of, okay, this is risky, in someone's mind might help change that behavior even in that moment of passion.
Sure. What else do you think we could do for prevention, or what are your organizations doing for prevention?
Well, one is, I know we definitely we provide condoms to people when they come in. We offer them to people when they come in, and they actually, they're available. We talk about different risky behaviors. Everyone who comes in fills out a questionnaire. And it is the same no matter who you are, whether you're coming in for STD clinic, or you're coming in because you think you're pregnant, or you're coming in for an annual exam. Everybody gets asked the same question, including, are your sexual partners male, female, or both? We ask questions about, how many partners you've had in the last 3 months and 6 months, all this kind of...
Getting rid of those labels, promiscuity, or gay, or lesbian, or bisexual.
That's true.
And just going for the heart of it.
Everybody is asked the same questions, no matter what. So it's not like if you come in and you notice that, oh, that person's got that green sheet, and so have I, so that means they're here for the XYZ testing. I mean, everybody's, it's pretty neutral, and we try to be, very, very respectful of that. I think that's one of our strengths.
Excellent.
Something that we've recently introduced at CAP is actually a new outreach center for gay men on Capitol Hill. It's called The Hub, and it's at 1551 Ogden Street in Denver. And we're using that as a place where gay men can gather for groups, but also for testing, medical advice, community information, but also a place where they'd be able to learn more about those harm-reducing
in a very comfortable, safe
safe place, and not a place where they have to walk through a big sign that says, STD clinic, or get your test here,
in neon lights.
Like yes, in neon lights.
Well, excellent. Well, it sounds like it's actually a fairly easy process at both organizations. So I encourage everybody to go get tested, whether it's your birthday or your anniversary or you're starting a new relationship. And unfortunately, we're out of time, but I would like to thank both of you for being here, and I think it was an illuminating conversation. I feel like I'm going to go get tested right now, just in case. You never know.
Nobody's open right now.
All right, maybe not this moment, but I will soon. Okay. So thank you both. Excellent. And have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking us.
Thank you, and have a great night.
Good night.
Our very own movie expert has searched his library for just the perfect flick for you to watch. Here's Mark Thompson to tell you all about it.
Hello, Mark Thompson here from The Fan Addict, talking about the movie Loggerheads. As an aspiring filmmaker, the DVD Loggerheads is an independent feature that strikes doubt in my heart. All the right ingredients for a great film are right there. Top-notch photography, a skilled cast, and realistic dialogue are all in place, but somehow the sum of the parts end up being slightly less than the parts themselves. The film stars Bonnie Hunt as an unwed mother who many years after giving up her baby tries to reconnect with her son. She returns to the adoption agency to try to find out more about the now grown child.
Some states allow for that, but in North Carolina all adoptions are closed, which means the birth records are sealed permanently. We find that's best for all members of the adoption triad.
It's best for the triad? I mean, what about him? I mean, he's at a certain age now. If he were to try to contact me.
Well, if an adoptee contacts us, the only thing we're allowed to provide is what's known as a letter of non-identifying information. Nothing that could ever sacrifice your anonymity.
My anonymity. Yeah.
Miss Bellamy, when birth mothers like yourself try to find relinquished children, it can be very disruptive to the adoptive family. A closed adoption protects them.
Protects them from what?
From you.
Kip Pardue plays Mark, the adopted son, who, much like the loggerhead turtle, is compelled to return to the origins of his birth. Along the way, he meets George, played by Michael Kelly, who falls for him and serves as a sounding board for Mark's inner thoughts.
Said my mom was 17 years old when she had me. It said she was tall, with blonde hair and blue eyes. It said she was smart. She made good grades and she was popular with her peers, which I'm really trying hard not to hold against her. It said she was full of promise, whatever that means. I know what it means. It means I take after my dad, I guess.
In Jesus' name, amen.
Completing the adoption triad is Mark's adoptive parents, played by Tess Harper and Chris Sarandon. They rejected Mark upon learning of his gay sexuality.
I don't think there is a her.
What do you mean?
I mean, I don't think there's a woman over there.
I wanted to be deeply moved by this film, but a sudden plot device towards the end left me cold and I fell away from the story. As sincere and well-made as it was, the film just didn't work for me. Though worth a viewing for great pieces parts, I give it 3.5 triangles. Rent it and see if it works better for you.
From the Movie Fanatic, I'm Mark Thompson.
Summertime movies need air conditioning so you can stay cool. If your house doesn't have AC, then you need to go to the theater. Here's a preview of a movie that's coming up at the Cool and Dark Mayan.
Hello, I'm Jerry Blank. You know, being the new kid in school is never easy, especially when you're a boozer.
You're a fat goblin.
Son.
She is.
I know, Derek. I have eyes. A loser.
What's your IQ?
Pisces. And a user. Would you like to carry my books? After 32 years of being a bit of a troublemaker, I've decided that I'm going to start my life exactly where I left off. Back in school.
You have to be special, Jerry.
Special?
You have to make the honor roll.
Be prom queen.
Make the honor roll.
But this time, I'm gonna fit in. Hey, homies, how about making some room? Because people like me. Why doesn't anybody like me?
Now, as many of you know, it's science fair time again. Your project could be about finding the link between a loser and a fatty.
You crossed my child zone again. You're gonna pull back a buddy stomp. It all came rushing back to me. The years of drug-addled, alcohol-tainted debasement. I'm gonna make you feel so good.
You're off the team.
But my daddy's in a coma.
Go see the school grief counselor. She's supposed to care.
I wish my daddy was in a coma. He's dead, Jerry. Please put some effort into it. I hate you.
What'd you say?
What did you hear?
I'd rather not repeat it.
Well, then I guess we'll never know.
She really loves the fellas. Likes the hoe.
I need more out of this relationship than I'm willing to put in. You pushed me away. I wasn't pushing you away. I was pulling me toward myself.
This summer, you're invited to purchase tickets to the film version of the hit Comedy Central series. Why can't we just be friends? Fat hips sink ships. Amy Sedaris. These are my new best friends. Who's his face and what's her name? Stephen Colbert.
I love you.
And Paul Danello.
I may be an authority figure, but I have the mind of a child.
So, Monica, who's fat and ugly now?
Still you, Jerry.
Strangers with candy. This is nice. Family.
We don't speak with food in our mouths at this table.
I don't have any food in my mouth.
When watching people dancing, it's hard to watch the crowd.
If If you'd like to go see this movie, why not give us a call on the movie line at 303-861-0829. We'll give a free pair of tickets to 10 randomly selected callers. Just leave us your name and phone number, and if you're one of the lucky ones, we'll call you back to let you know how to pick up your tickets. Well, that's it, and we got it all in. We hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for joining us, and don't forget, we'll be back on Sunday, August 27th at 10 p.m. right here on KBDI Channel 12. I'm Stephen Montez. Good night.